Welcome back, I'm Tedward, and today we're going to revisit a very special car. This is the N55 BMW M2, and it often gets forgotten about because they came out with the competition version with the S55. That's the same motor that they used in the F80 M3 and M4. I want to thank McGovern Auto Group and Autobahn USA in Dedham, Massachusetts for lending me this N55 2018 BMW M2 today. They have an incredibly eclectic inventory, so whether you're looking for the family cruiser or your first supercar, check their inventory. It's always rotating. They've got some interesting stuff. But the reason why I find this car so interesting is because it was kind of forgotten about once the competition came out. And I find a lot of folks cross-shopping, or instead of buying this, they go and say, well, I can get an M235i for cheaper. We'll talk about why that's maybe not a great idea, even though they share the same engine. But when the M2 came out, it was such a big deal because this was looked as kind of the spiritual successor to the E30. M3s had gotten so big. People were actually not very happy, even when the E92 series and E90 series came out, because they were fat. They were big cars. They were 3,600 pounds. So when you get into something like this, where it's a small little coupe, it starts to make sense. It starts to feel like a real M car. The problem, however, it still weighs about 3,500 pounds. It's the same as a BMW M3 of the F80 series. So yeah, maybe it's a shorter wheelbase, maybe it's a smaller car. We didn't drop a whole lot of weight. But let's look under the hood. This is the real reason a lot of people took issue with the M2 when it came out. It had an N designation motor. Yes, this is not an S motor, this is an N55. So a lot of folks weren't happy because they were getting an N55 instead of a designated S motor that was bespoke BMW M. But this does have some tricks up its sleeve for those who are going to use them on the racetrack, namely a dual sump oiling system that will hold up in high G corners. This is something you do not get in the M235i. This is the same dual sump found on the S55, and guess what? It's a very big deal, especially if you're going to drive it on tracks with high-speed, sustained lateral G corners. That dual sump is going to save your engine. I have a friend who just blew up his M235i because it lost oil pressure in a corner. But let's get inside and see if this is really the true bargain M car of the modern generation. Fun fact, when the battery in your key fob is dead, you just hold it up to the side of the column. All right. First things first. One reason I love the older M2 is because of the engine. The N55, objectively, it sounds better than the S55. First of all, BMW DCTs don't try to act like torque converter automatics. That's always a nice thing. So you actually do need to lean into the throttle before it moves. It's not going to creep on you like Volkswagen DSG does. And this generation of DCT is actually very smooth. I like the DCTs a lot better in the F80 generation and these M2s than I did in the E90 series that I own. I personally own that, and it's a bit clunky. Unlike the F80s, you don't have a toggle back and forth for your shift ferocity. So what you do have is you have your sport button. So we'd throw it there. No funny business with the suspension, it's just static. Front end grip is just wonderful. You can really settle it in on that rear end on power. What this has, the S65 of the previous generation M3, the E90, is torque. It's got so much torque, and you don't have to rev it way out to get what you want. You can really enjoy that mid-range. And I am fascinated by the exhaust on this Corolla. He's got quad tips in honor of the BMW M cars? Yes, very nice. I'll appreciate that nod of flattery, although not quite executed tastefully. People went so far as to question this car's M-ness based on the fact that it doesn't have an oil temperature gauge right in that tachometer. This car doesn't not have an oil temp gauge. You can actually toggle through and you can find it right down here. So it's not gone. It is not gone. You can tell that you have warmed your car up properly and you'll know that it's ready to dance when it's time. Still get a nice little wiggle on the upshift. Now we're at a 245 up front. Will be nice to this gentleman, but we got a 265 out back. That's plenty. I mean, for the most part, this is enough tire to do a lot of damage on some fun back roads. The N55 isn't a laggy motor either, even from 2,500 RPM. Only a little bit of a beat. We've got a static suspension. There's less to go wrong on this than its more expensive brothers. Not going to worry about getting those suspension faults. All you got to worry about is grip. This has more than enough brakes for a typical street car, which is impressive. If you wanted to take this out to a racetrack, you certainly would only need to pad slap it and put some high temp fluids in it. Nothing crazy. When this car came out, we were also still battling Porsche with their electric power assisted steering. People were moving away from hydraulics. This did too, and this car kind of caught a lot of flack for steering feel. To be honest, it's not something I notice as much anymore. I think back then it was a big deal because we were all driving these hydraulically assisted steering racks, and it was more noticeable that there was something a little bit missing from these. But now that we've driven so many cars and so many worse steering racks than this feels great. I'm not questioning where the car is on the road. I know what my inputs are gonna do. I can play with it. Oh, this gearbox is good, man. And they put the right paddles on it. So sure, maybe the interior is like a little bit cheaper than the F80, but for the driver interface, they still gave you these nice aluminum paddles, and everything you touch is just nice. So how's the livability? I mean, overall, this is still a BMW. It's still a luxury car. It wants to desensitize you from some things. So on the highway, on long journeys, even though this is a relatively stiff suspension, it's very livable. And on your daily commute, that's where you start to appreciate the electric assisted power steering. You know, mid-corner on a racetrack, maybe you want it to be manual, maybe you want it to be hydraulic, but typical driving, sometimes it's nice to just not feel everything. And because this engine's not so high-strung like the S65, I can be cruising at 80 miles per hour at under 2,500 RPM. That is not a thing with the older M3s. You will be at 3,200 RPM in your S65 in 7th gear. There's no overdrive in that. And in almost every situation, it feels faster than my M3 because I have torque. I don't have to wring its neck. I can be at 4,000 RPM, rev it out to 5,500. I don't have to go red line to red line and abuse this engine quite so much. I've got to say, I haven't been the biggest fan of new BMW M cars. I mean, the M5 is ridiculous. They're obviously fast and capable, but they've lost a little bit of excitement. They've lost a little bit of that rawness for me. This car actually puts it all back. I like it. I like this M2. It's putting a smile on my face. I love how you can feel the whole car just pivot about your hips. I know we all love high revving naturally aspirated engines. I'm certainly one of them. I bought one. But there's something to be said for the normal driving you do. And low and mid-range torque, Now that's a commodity, because when you're driving in this is what your normal day looks like. This is what a normal commute looks like. I know in YouTube land we like to pretend we're all just driving in the Alps and everything's perfect and you can drive this Ferrari, it'll make you happy. You know what makes you happy is being able to lean on the throttle and not die because you actually went somewhere instead of realized you had to downshift 3 gears to get out of Dodge. The N55 is still a BMW engine. It's not without its faults, but as far as reliability goes, they're pretty high on the list of like stout inline sixes from the business. It's great stuff. In hindsight, I don't think I gave this car enough credit when it came out. I think I was high on the S55 bandwagon. I wanted an 8,000 RPM V8. And to call this the spiritual successor to the E30 never really gelled with me because of its weight. But driving this car today, I think it's a real gem. Balance is the name of the game. And although the M2 Competition is phenomenal and it's fast, I think shoving that S55 motor in there throws it off balance just enough that all it wants to do is blow the tires off of it when you breathe on the throttle. I might be singing a different tune if I thought this car was underpowered, but frankly, I don't. I think this is really nice. This is a great driver. So I don't always give buying advice because who cares what I think? You gotta go drive your cars. But what I will say is I think these are kind of a relative bargain because they sit in this weird spot where people think, well, I don't wanna get the N55 now that the S55 came out. Well, you don't need it. So if you can get away with it and it's cheaper and it's in your budget, I would definitely recommend test driving one of these and finding out if it's for you. And I certainly prefer it to the M235i, which I think really, that steering is kind of unforgivable to me. I've been told that if you do an alignment, you can make that steering dial in a little nicer and it feels better. But to be honest, I think the M2 is where it's at. So thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Thank you to the McGovern Auto Group for inviting me out to Autobahn USA in Dedham, Massachusetts to drive this M2. Don't forget to respect the drive, and I'll see you in the next one. I could really get used to this. I love the way this car balances. Short wheelbase makes it so chuckable. Oh, there goes my recording device. Who cares? You can tell it's a good car when my equipment starts flying off of me. That's good stuff.